All right, so basically, as we slowly put together these more well-produced countdown to catastrophe videos that are taking a little bit of a longer time, the Trump administration is happening really fast. So what I'm going to do is this little update on catastrophe video series, maybe one a week, maybe two a week. We'll see how productive I am. Just keeping tabs on what's been going on. And I think we'll start with U.S. foreign policy because what's happening in the Middle East is nuts. Back in 2017, Robert Paxson, when putting together a list of reasons why he didn't think Trump was a fascist, he said that Trump didn't actually seek territorial gain. Paxson would later, after January 6th, renege on that and say, no, actually, Trump is a fascist. But now what we're seeing with his conversation about Greenland, his conversation about making Canada the 51st state, which he's serious about, that's something Steve Bannon has been talking about for years, and the conversation about the Panama Canal is that Trump has territorial ambition. And not just that, he's sort of ideologically in favor of the concept of nation states expanding their borders if they're capable of doing so. Which takes us to Israel. On Wednesday, Netanyahu said he was going to establish a new security corridor in the Gaza Strip, expanding Israeli control over that territory. And this came after Netanyahu said he was going to change the face of the Middle East and that he agreed with Trump that Palestinians should be encouraged to voluntarily evacuate. Netanyahu said this new corridor would be named the Morag Corridor, naming it after a settlement that had been in Gaza prior to the 2005 evacuation of the settlers from the Strip. Which brings us to really the crux of what's been happening since 2005. See, what they wanted the world to believe was that Israel pulling the settlers out of the Gaza Strip was a unilateral disengagement. But that's not what happened. This is Jimmy Carter's book, Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid. He describes the disengagement. As he wrote in 2006, Gaza is being strangled since the Israeli withdrawal, surrounded by a separation barrier that is penetrated only by Israeli-controlled checkpoints, with just a single opening for personnel only into Egypt's Sinai as their access to the outside world. There have been no moves by Israel to permit transportation by sea or by air. Fishermen are not permitted to leave the harbor. Workers are prevented from going to outside jobs. The import or export of food and other goods is severely restricted and often cut off completely, and the police, teachers, nurses, and social workers are deprived of salaries. Per capita, income has decreased 40% during the last 3 years, and the poverty rate has reached 70%. The UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food has stated that acute malnutrition in Gaza is already on the same scale as that seen in the poorer countries of the southern Sahara, with more than half of all Palestinian families eating only one meal a day. This was the impact of Israel's unilateral withdrawal, even before Israel's massive bombardment and reinvasion in July 2006 after Hamas militants captured an Israeli soldier. Now, that bombardment and invasion was followed by a bombardment and invasion in December of 2008, which went into January 2009, Operation Cast Lead, 1,400 Palestinians killed, and that was followed by Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012 and Operation Protective Edge in 2014, when 500 children were killed over the course of 2 months. All of these operations, and I will provide sources for someone who disagrees, began after Israel unilaterally broke a ceasefire. And what just happened? Following over a year of what Amnesty International has called a genocide, last month, Israel broke what was called a ceasefire. It's not really a ceasefire if Israel killed 150 Palestinian civilians in the time that it was in effect, and since then have killed over 1,000 civilians, including 15 Red Crescent paramedics who were found in a mass grave, one of them with his hands tied behind his back. So why is this happening? We know Israel's perspective on the matter. They want all of the land from the river to the sea to be part of an Israeli state. But why does the U.S. support this? The U.S. didn't always support Israel. In the Suez Crisis in 1956, we forced them to pull out of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. But we have to understand, the Middle East is territory that the U.S. wants complete control over. Eisenhower described the Middle East as, quote, probably the richest economic prize in the field of foreign investment. In 1958, the National Security Council drafts a document. At a time when Gamal Abdel Nasser is the leader of Egypt, part of the non-aligned movement, a leader of Arab nationalism, which basically means the understanding that these Arab countries should have control over their resources. And the NSC says that Arab nationalism could be combated by supporting Israel as the only strong pro-West power left in the Near East. And in 1967, Israel defeats Arab nationalism by defeating Gamal Abdel Nasser in the Six-Day War. Today, we don't have Arab nationalism as a problem, but we have Iranian influence as a problem. So look at outside of Gaza, where this broader conflict between Israel and Arab militias is taking place. It's taking place in Lebanon, between Israel and the Shiite militia backed by Iran, Hezbollah. It's taking place in Yemen. Israel is actually bombing Iran directly. And these are things that if the U.S. did it themselves, like, that would have broader repercussions. So we outsource it to the neo-colonial regime so that Israel can act as our counterbalance in the region to Iranian influence. And of course, we're bombing the Houthis ourselves, targeting residential homes in our bombardment. But there's a new thing going on as well. In the past, U.S. leaders have supported Israel in their siege on Gaza, but they've been, reticent to just allow a complete takeover of the West Bank, haven't really allowed an expansion of the security zone into Gaza. What we're seeing now, though, with the Trump administration is this fundamental idea of this fascist ideology that might makes right, and if a state wants to expand its territories, if it has the means to do so, it absolutely should. When we're looking at what's happening with Israel, we're looking at a deeply ideological global movement to support the right of states to expand their borders. And think, when Trump talks about Panama, when Trump talks about Canada, when Trump talks about Greenland, the implications of what's going on in the Middle East. All right, now you're caught up on the catastrophe.